You didn't post it. Not because it wasn't good enough. Not because the timing was off. You didn't post it because somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered, "What if they don't respond the way you need them to?" And you listened. That voice, that one, small, invisible voice, has been running your life for years. And you haven't even noticed. Let's talk about the real problem, why most people spend their lives seeking approval. Let's talk about something nobody wants to admit. You are good at performing. Not acting. Not lying. Performing. You've spent years, maybe your entire adult life, carefully constructing a version of yourself that other people will accept, approve of, validate. You learned, somewhere along the way, that who you actually are might not be enough. So you built a second self. A curated self. A self that says the right things, laughs at the right moments, and never takes up too much space. And here's what's terrifying about that: it works. People like the curated version of you. They laugh with it. They promote it. They swipe right on it. And so you pour more energy into the performance. You lose sleep crafting emails that sound right. You replay conversations in your head at 2 a.m., dissecting what you should have said. You change your opinion mid-sentence because you felt the temperature in the room shift. You walk into a dinner party already calculating, who do these people need me to be tonight? And by the time you drive home, you're exhausted. Not because the dinner was hard. Because you were never really there. Let's look at this more closely, because the approval trap doesn't just affect how you feel. It rewires how you make decisions. Think about the last time you took a job, not because it genuinely excited you, but because it sounded impressive. Because the job title made people nod in a certain way at Thanksgiving. Think about the last time you stayed in a relationship, not because it was feeding your soul, but because breaking up would require explaining yourself to people who weren't even in that relationship. Think about the last time you didn't start the business. Didn't write the book. Didn't move to the city. Didn't say what you actually believed at the table. Not because you lacked the ability. Because you were quietly taking a poll. Checking in with an invisible audience to see if they would approve. And when you sensed, or even imagined, that they wouldn't, you folded. This is what approval seeking actually does to a life. It doesn't just make you a people pleaser at the surface level. It makes you a stranger to yourself. Over time, you stop knowing what you actually want. You stop trusting your own instincts. Your gut becomes unreliable because you've spent years overriding it with crowd consensus. You'll ask 5 different people for their opinion on a decision that only you can make. Not because you need information. Because you need permission. And here's the cruel irony that nobody talks about. The more you chase approval, the less you actually get it. Because people don't deeply respect what performs for them. They appreciate it. They enjoy it. But they don't respect it. Respect, real, lasting respect, is reserved for people who have the rare and unsettling quality of not needing yours. You've seen it. You know the person in the room who just says what they think. Quietly. Without flinching. Without scanning the audience. Something about them pulls you in. Something about them feels solid. Like there's ground under their feet that isn't under anyone else's. That's not a personality trait. That's a philosophy. And it has a name. Now let me show you what Stoic philosophy says about seeking approval. A man sat in what was effectively a prison. Not iron bars. Not a dungeon. But a body that was enslaved, a position in Roman society that gave him zero power, zero standing, and zero certainty about tomorrow. His name was Epictetus. And from within that life, the life most people would call the worst kind of defeat, he quietly arrived at an idea so radical, so utterly counterintuitive, that it would eventually be read by Roman emperors, by generals, by heads of state, and now by people sitting in rush-hour traffic wondering why they feel so hollow. There is only one thing that can truly be taken from you, and it isn't your body, your possessions, your reputation, or your relationships. It's your own inner judgment. And that, only you surrender willingly. Stop for a second. Let that breathe. Epictetus wasn't talking about being a loner. He wasn't telling people to become cold or indifferent to others. He was pointing at something much more precise. He was pointing at the exact place where we lose ourselves, the moment we hand someone else the pen and let them write the verdict on our value. The Stoics had a concept they returned to again and again. They called it the dichotomy of control. There are things within your control, your choices, your values, your responses, your attention, your effort. And there are things outside your control, the weather, the economy, other people's behavior, and most importantly, what other people think of you. Now, modern culture has done something deeply strange with this. We have built entire industries, social media platforms, marketing engines, entire therapeutic frameworks, around the idea that what people think of you matters. And the Stoics would look at all of that and say, "You've gotten confused about which category that goes in." Here is what the Stoics understood about approval that most self-help content gets completely wrong. Seeking approval isn't about vanity. It isn't a flaw in your character. It isn't selfishness or weakness. It is, at its root, a misallocation of attention. You are a finite being. You have a finite number of days, a finite amount of energy, a finite reservoir of creative and emotional power. Every hour you spend adjusting yourself to the lens of someone else's perception is an hour you did not spend actually living. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world during his lifetime, the Emperor of Rome, wrote in his private journal about how meaningless it was to crave fame. To need the praise of people who would be dead in 100 years, whose names themselves would be forgotten, whose opinion of you existed for only a breath in the vast ocean of time. A man with an entire empire handing him approval on a silver platter, and he was writing reminders to himself not to care about it. That alone should tell you something. The hunger for approval doesn't get satisfied by getting more approval. It gets worse. Because it was never about the approval. It was always about the void it was trying to fill. The Stoics had a remedy. And it wasn't affirmations. It wasn't visualization. It wasn't building a morning routine. It was something much harder and much more liberating. Turn the gaze inward. Ask yourself, not, what will people think, but, is this consistent with who I have decided to be? The Stoics called this internal standard the daimon, your inner guiding principle. Your character. Your values made into a spine. When you have that, you have something external approval can never give you. A verdict that holds. Because here's the truth about external approval. It's wind. On Tuesday they love you. On Wednesday something shifts. By Thursday you did something that didn't match their mood and suddenly the warmth is gone, and you're scrambling, readjusting, trying to figure out what you did wrong. But an internal standard? That doesn't change with someone's mood. That doesn't evaporate because someone unfollowed you. That stays. And over time, this is the part that matters, over time, the people who build their sense of self on that kind of internal bedrock become something rare. They become trustworthy to themselves. And that's the beginning of everything. Now I'll tell you a story that will help you understand the Stoic way to stop seeking approval. His name, for this story, is Nick. And by every external measurement, Nick had built the life. Senior manager at a consulting firm. The kind of apartment with the right address. The right car. The right group of friends who met for brunch on Sundays and talked about their 401ks and their recent hiking trips and their personal brands. Nick had built his entire existence around one silent, unspoken operating principle. Don't let anyone be disappointed in you. It had started young. His father was a man who handed out approval like a scarce resource, reserved only for peak performance. Good grades. The right sport. The right college. The right job. Nick learned that love was conditional. Not because his father was cruel, but because his father was human, and broken in his own specific way. But Nick had taken that lesson and turned it into a worldview. He became genuinely brilliant at reading rooms. At saying exactly the right thing. At being the person who made everyone comfortable, who resolved the tension, who never rocked the boat. His colleagues loved him. His bosses promoted him. His friends called him the most easygoing guy they knew. And on the inside? Nick felt like a building with no load-bearing walls. Structurally impressive from the outside. Hollow in the middle. He had been dating a woman named Maria for 2 years. She was kind. She was genuinely good. And she loved the version of Nick she knew. Which was the problem? Because Nick had never actually shown her the real one. He agreed with her preferences, on restaurants, on where to travel, on how to spend Sunday, not because he genuinely aligned, but because disagreeing felt like a risk he wasn't willing to take. He had a dream, quiet, persistent, almost embarrassing to him, of leaving consulting and building something of his own. A small design studio. Nothing flashy. Just his. He'd had the idea for 4 years. 4 years. He'd never said it out loud to anyone. Because every time he imagined saying it, he heard the response in his head before it came. That's risky, don't you think? What about your income? You're so good at what you're doing now. He was having arguments with people who hadn't spoken yet. And the imaginary crowd always won. The fracture happened in October. Maria asked him, on a quiet evening over dinner, something simple. What do you actually want, Nick? Like, for your life. Not for us. Just for you. And he opened his mouth. And nothing came out. Not because he was at a loss for words. Because the honest answer, I don't know anymore. I've been so busy wanting what everyone else needs me to want that I lost track, felt like too much to say. So he smiled. And said he wanted what he had. And Maria looked at him for a long moment, that look that perceptive people give when they know you just gave them a rehearsed answer instead of a real one, and she nodded slowly. And something between them shifted that night. Not dramatically. Not with a fight or a scene. Just, quietly. Like air going out of something. 3 weeks later, Nick's company announced a restructuring. His role, the one he'd spent 7 years performing perfectly for, was being dissolved. They offered him a lateral move. Different team. Different city. Different version of the same hollow performance. He had 48 hours to decide. And in those 48 hours, something strange happened. With his identity by job suddenly pulled out from under him, the noise got quiet. He drove to the lake outside the city at 11 p.m. This is a thing people do in crisis that they don't talk about, they just drive somewhere with water, and he sat there in the dark. And for the first time in maybe a decade, with no audience present, with nothing to perform and no verdict to chase. He asked himself, what do I actually believe about my own life? Not what his father believed. Not what his colleagues believed. Not what LinkedIn believed. Him. He sat with that for a long time. And the answer, when it came, wasn't loud. It was just, clear. He didn't want the lateral move. He didn't want the new city or the new version of the old performance. He wanted the design studio. He wanted to build something that, when people asked who made it, the answer was just, him. He turned down the lateral move. He told Maria everything, the dream, the 4 years of silence, the imaginary arguments, the hollow performances. She cried a little. Not because she was upset. Because she recognized the person talking. He'd finally shown up. The design studio didn't explode overnight. He lost clients. He lost some of the Sunday brunch friends who didn't know what to do with a Nick who had an actual opinion. But here's what he gained. He gained the only thing the Stoics ever said was worth gaining. Integrity. The state of being undivided. The word comes from the Latin integer, whole number. Complete. Not fractured into the public self and the private self and the performed self. Just one person. One consistent, coherent person who knew what he valued and acted from that place. And everything that came after, the studio's eventual success, the deeper relationship with Maria, the sleep, the actual sleep, came from that. Not from the approval. From the decision to stop needing it. So now we get to the part that matters. Not philosophy as an idea to appreciate. Philosophy as something you actually do. Here are the shifts, not habits, not hacks, but genuine cognitive shifts, that the Stoics practiced and that you can apply starting today. Shift 1. Locate the audience you've been performing for. The first step is the one most people skip because it requires more honesty than they're willing to bring. Sit down, not metaphorically, actually sit down, and ask yourself. Whose approval am I actually chasing? Be specific. For many people, it's a parent. The father who rationed praise. The mother who communicated love through disappointment. The parent whose voice you internalized so thoroughly that you now carry it with you into every room you enter and every decision you make. For others it's a peer group. The college friends. The career circle. The people you've silently agreed to measure yourself against. For some it's an abstraction, society, people, an invisible jury of imagined critics. Name it. Write it down if you have to. Because here's what the Stoics understood about clarity. You cannot untangle yourself from a knot you refuse to look at. Once you name the audience, you've already done something radical. You've made it visible. And things that are visible can be examined. Things that can be examined can be questioned. Things that can be questioned can be changed. You don't have to hate the audience. You don't have to cut them from your life. You just have to stop letting them live in your chest and cast votes on your choices. Shift 2. Separate opinion from fact. Here's something the Stoics were almost obsessively clear about. An opinion is not a verdict. Someone thinks your idea is foolish. That is an opinion. Someone thinks you made the wrong choice. That is an opinion. Someone is disappointed in you. That is their emotional state. None of those things are facts about your worth. We have gotten so confused about this. We treat someone else's negative reaction to us as though it's information about who we objectively are. As though their disappointment is a court ruling. It isn't. The Stoics practiced something called prosoke, which roughly translates to watchful attention to the self. Part of that practice was learning to catch the moment when you're about to confuse someone's opinion with a fact. When you feel that sting, when someone criticizes you, dismisses you, withdraws approval, pause. Ask yourself, is this true? Or is this one person's perspective filtered through their own history, their own fears, their own unexamined assumptions? More often than not, it's the latter. That doesn't mean you never take feedback. The Stoics were not advocating for arrogance. It means you develop the discernment to ask whose feedback, about what, and from what position of understanding. Not every opinion deserves your attention. And almost none of them deserve your identity. Shift 3. Practice the art of the unpopular answer. This one will be uncomfortable. Start deliberately saying true things in small situations. Not provocative things. Not needlessly contrarian things. Just true things. Even when the room doesn't want them. Someone asks if you liked the movie. You didn't. Say so. Someone proposes a plan in the meeting. You think there's a flaw. Raise it. Someone asks where you want to go for dinner. You have a preference. Offer it. These seem trivial. They are not. Every small act of honest expression is a rep in the muscle of self-trust. And every time you suppress the true answer to manage someone's reaction, you are reinforcing the neural architecture of approval dependence. The Stoics called virtue its own reward, meaning, the act of being aligned is the point, not the reaction it produces. When you practice small honesty, you're not just being more authentic. You're training yourself to locate your own signal above the noise of anticipated reaction. Over time, and this is the part that surprises people, you'll find that the world doesn't collapse. Most people respect the honest answer more than the managed one. And the few who don't? They were never your people. Shift 4. Ask, what do I respect? Not, what do they want? Before any significant decision, not every decision, the significant ones, change the question you're asking. Most approval seekers, when facing a choice, unconsciously run a background process. What will this look like to people I care about? What will happen to my standing if this goes wrong? What's the safest version of this that protects my reputation? Replace the question with this one. If I acted from my values right now, fully, without performance, what would I do? Not what would the best version of you do in a fantasy. Not what would a motivational poster tell you to do. What would you, your actual self, with your actual values, do if no one was watching and no verdict was coming? Then do that. The Stoics understood that virtue, which they defined not as morality by rulebook but as excellence of character, is not something you perform for an audience. It is something you enact for the clarity of your own soul. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, the one he never intended anyone to read, about counting the blessings you actually possess and thinking how much you would yearn for them if they were not yours. He was emperor. No one was watching him write those words. He wrote them because the act of thinking clearly was the point. That's the standard. Shift 5. Build the internal verdict system. Here is perhaps the most powerful practical shift of all. Create an internal evaluation system that operates before external feedback arrives. This is what the Stoics called the evening review, a practice of examining your day not through the lens of how it appeared to others, but through the lens of your own values. At the end of the day, instead of replaying what people said about you or scanning your phone for reactions, ask yourself 3 questions. 1. Did I act in alignment with what I say I value today? 2. Where did I compromise myself to manage someone else's comfort? 3. What would I do differently if no one was watching? This is not self-criticism. The Stoics were not into self-flagellation. This is self-authorship. Every night you do this, you are slowly, incrementally shifting the locus of evaluation from out there to in here. You are building the apparatus through which you assess your own worth. And over weeks, over months, you will notice something. You stop needing the check-in from outside. Because you've already run your own numbers. You already know where you stood today. And that knowledge is quieter, deeper, and more sustaining than any like, any compliment, any nod from across the table. Shift 6. Let people be disappointed. This is the hardest one. So let's take it slowly. Somewhere in your development, you learned that other people's disappointment was your responsibility. That when someone was unhappy with you, your job was to fix it, to adjust, to manage. And that belief, that ordinary, understandable, deeply human belief, has cost you enormously. Because here's the thing about disappointment. It belongs to the person feeling it. When someone is disappointed in a choice you made from your own values, from your own honest assessment of your life, their disappointment is information about their expectations, not about your mistake. Expectations are not contracts. The fact that someone hoped you would behave a certain way does not mean you owe them that behavior. This is not callousness. It is just precision about whose life you are responsible for living. The Stoics had a concept they called oikeiosis, the idea of concentric circles of responsibility. You are most responsible for your inner world, then your immediate relationships, then your community, then outward. But none of those circles, not a single one, includes being whatever someone needs you to be in order for them to be comfortable. That's not love. That's disappearing. When you let someone experience their disappointment without rushing to dissolve it, without reshaping yourself to make it go away, two things happen. First, you discover that their disappointment doesn't kill you. It's uncomfortable. It may be sad. It may require a hard conversation. But it doesn't end you. Second, the relationship, if it survives, becomes real. Because it's no longer built on your performance. It's built on actual contact between actual people. And that is something completely different. Here is what they don't tell you about the moment you stop seeking approval. It's not triumphant. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or a revelation that hits you like lightning. It comes quietly. It comes on an ordinary Tuesday, when someone looks at you with mild disappointment and you notice, with genuine surprise, that you're okay. You feel the discomfort. You don't dissolve. And in that moment, something shifts at the foundation. Because you've just learned something the approval-seeking version of you never could have absorbed. You were never actually in danger. The thing you were so afraid of, their withdrawal, their disappointment, their changed opinion of you, it arrived. And you survived it. And the sun came up the next morning. And now you know. You have spent, and I want you to really hear this, you have spent an enormous amount of your life being careful. Carefully editing yourself. Carefully managing impressions. Carefully constructing a self that could pass whatever inspection was coming. And that carefulness was not weakness. It was a strategy. It was how you learned to feel safe in a world that seemed to require it. But you're older now. And you know enough to understand that the safety it bought was always counterfeit. Because a life built on other people's approval is a life that can be taken from you on any given Wednesday when the approval stops. And a life built on your own character, your own values, your own honestly held sense of who you are, that can't be taken. That is yours. Epictetus knew this from a prison. Marcus Aurelius knew it from a palace. And they're both pointing at the same door. You are the only one who can walk through it. Stop performing. Stop calibrating. Stop waiting for a verdict that was never going to come from out there anyway. The approval you have been hunting for, through years of carefully managed impressions and swallowed opinions and quietly abandoned dreams, was never theirs to give. It was always yours to grant. Go ahead. Grant it. If this made you rethink your life, don't just watch, act. Subscribe for more Stoic insights. And comment below, are you done seeking approval? Yes or no?